conflict isn't necessarily a sign that there is something wrong with the relationship. Sometimes a conflict is going to tell us more about the relationship than the conflict itself. The first thing for you to accept is that people are going to react differently to conflicts. Some people may become defensive instantly. Some they may become aggressive. Some may shut down completely. Some people they will apologize just to make the discomfort disappear, just to be able to preserve a relationship. It doesn't mean that the conflict has disappeared or the conflict has been resolved. It just means that it has been swept under the rug. So the question of this video is, how are you going to handle conflict in such a way without attacking the person, trying to also preserve the relationship, and without abandoning yourself and your self-confidence and the way that you believe in things? In this video, I will be sharing 6 things that I think are so important when you're dealing with conflict. The first one being, never try to solve a conflict while you're being flooded with emotions. Just because there is a conflict, it doesn't mean that it has to be solved immediately. Sometimes you can press the pause button. Why? Because if you're trying to solve a conflict while you're extremely angry, you're upset, you may end up saying things that you don't really mean. You cannot convey the message that you really wanted to say because you're feeling so many intense emotions. And what happens is that both people are trying to win the argument instead of trying to understand each other. Just to wrap up on this point, whenever you're faced with a conflict and you know that your emotions are high, you cannot deal with this conflict effectively right away. The best way for you to express it is to say, I am too emotional to have this conversation right now. I want to come back to it when I feel calmer. And therefore you avoid shutting this conversation completely by saying, I'm done. I don't want to have this conversation. You can compare these 2 different tones that are being used. The first one is you're saying that you're emotional and that you cannot have this conversation properly right now, but you want to come back to it when you feel calmer, which means that this conflict has been put on pause. But the other tone of conversation is, I'm done. I'm ending this conversation right now. Let's say 2 people are having a conflict, person A and person B. Person A wants to resolve the conflict right away, and person B wants to just take some time to process their feelings, to process their thoughts before coming back to the conversation in a much more calm way. So if person A says to person B, I'm done, I'm not having this conversation, what happens is that person B feels that this conflict is never resolved. They will keep playing the conversations in their mind, and this conflict has been just swept under the rug. And it will be revisited at a later date because the conflict has never actually been solved. But what if person A had actually said to person B, I am really emotional right now and I cannot have this conversation properly. I would like to come back to it when I feel calmer. See this difference in tone and the way that you approach this conflict? It has already reassured the other person that you value their emotions, you value their feeling, and you value the relationship. You are ready to discuss about it to make things right. But right now, you know that you're going to say something that you don't mean. You know you're going to say something in the heat of the moment, and it might even escalate the situation instead of cooling things down. And the most important thing in this is when you say you're going to take a pause and you're going to come back to the conversation at a later date, you actually have to maintain that promise. The person who is saying, I need some time to think, I need some time to process my emotions, and I will come back to this conversation again. It is the responsibility of this person to actually open the conversation again with the other person. This shows the commitment that you have towards the relationship. This will show the engagement that you have in playing your part in resolving the conflict. The second point is when you're actually having the discussion in order to resolve the conflict, never use words such as, you're always like this. This is the kind of person you are. You made me feel this way. You did this. Like you're blaming the person. The problem should not be the person. If you're trying to actually resolve a conflict, the focus is not going to be the person. The focus is going to be the problem at hand. So you shift the focus from the person and you put it on the problem. We're trying to resolve a problem. So instead of you saying to the person, you're so selfish, and starting your argument with that phrase, you're so selfish, just change the way that you're starting this argument. It's a very simple way of using your words correctly, which can have a totally different outcome. Because whenever you're starting your phrase with you, you're shifting the blame on the person. It's quite obvious that the person is going to be really defensive. So you're shifting the whole mood of that conflict into a bigger conflict. So what happens is that the person now feels attacked. Like you're directly attacking their character. You're directly putting a stain on their character. So naturally, they are going to ignore the problem at hand and they are going to try to defend their character. So instead of pointing fingers at the person's character by saying, you're so selfish, you're mean, you always do this, just say, I just didn't feel that my needs were met today. Just say how you feel. Express the way you feel about the situation. So you see how shifting some words can have a totally different impact on your situation. If your goal is to try to resolve a conflict, you have to think properly of the words that you're saying. So instead of attacking the identity of a person, you're saying, I don't feel that my needs were considered in this situation. Oh, this is how I felt. I felt hurt. So you see that the first way of starting the conversation is attacking the person's identity, while the second way is addressing the behavior. And the thing is, when you're resolving a conflict, just put your ego aside. Whenever you're trying to resolve a conflict, being vulnerable about the situation is not a weakness. So accept when you feel hurt. It's better to convey to the person that you feel hurt instead of trying to shield yourself on your own, and you're feeding those underlying emotions, negative emotions that you're feeling. And what happens is that instead of conveying truly what you feel, you end up saying mean things to protect yourself. And some people, they cannot really guess to what extent they have hurt a person because they have not paid attention to what they have done. So you can address. So the way that you address this situation is you tell the person that this comment or the thing that it did made you feel hurt. So think of it as a conflict resolution workflow. The first one is what happened, what according to you happened. The second one is how that made you feel. And the third one is what do you need in the future? What lesson do you take from it? What do you actually need from this person in the future so that this situation does not happen again? So what happened is when you cancelled at the last minute, this is what happened. I felt disappointed because I had planned my entire evening around it. And what you would expect from the situation in the future, so what you need is, I would appreciate more notice in the future. The person is going to receive it exactly how you conveyed it, because there is nothing which is pointing to their character. There's nothing which is pointing to their identity in it. It makes sense because the person can also project themselves in that situation and think to themselves, I would also be upset if somebody had done that to me. I would also feel the same way if I had been in his or her shoes. Immediately, the person starts developing the connection to the other person. Immediately, the understanding starts to get built. So all of this happened. Why? Because the message was clear. The third point is listening. Developing listening skills is really important in life. Some people, when they're faced with conflicts, they actually listen only so that they are prepared to fight back. They are prepared to now tell their side of a story. So they are not really listening to that person. They are not really listening to understand what that person is trying to tell them. It doesn't mean that you have to listen and you have to agree to everything the person is telling you, because sometimes there are two stories and they can both be true to some extent. There are two sides of a coin. But if you're trying to actually resolve the conflict, you need to be able to understand how the other person is feeling. You need to be able to develop an empathy towards that person as well. So basically what you're telling the person is that you're understanding their point, you're acknowledging their feelings, You're not dismissing their feelings right away. You're not dismissing what the point that they're making. What you're saying is, I'm hearing you. I'm listening to you. I acknowledge your emotions. The fourth point, which is the hardest point for most people, is to actually take responsibility of your actions, is to take responsibility of your part. It's not thinking, whose fault is this really? But really thinking, what part actually belongs to me? What part really I could have done differently to avoid this situation? Maybe you got caught up with some work and you forgot to tell the person that you have to cancel the plans, and you did it last minute, and you forgot to apologize as well. When you know you did something wrong, you have to apologize, and not by saying, I'm sorry you felt this way, because this is basically saying that I did nothing wrong. It's you who's feeling this way. I'm taking myself out of it. But by genuinely apologizing, you've said something rude to someone and you need to apologize to this person. You say something like, I'm sorry that I've spoken to you like that. I was frustrated, but that wasn't fair. And you follow it with a change of behavior for the next time. That is a true apology. It's important for you to understand that you don't just apologize to keep the peace. You apologize because you understand that you did something wrong. You understand that the person has been hurt. The fifth point is to never turn a conflict, like one conflict, into a whole character judgment. Like it becomes a courtroom where all of the previous arguments, all of the previous conflicts just get showcased here, and we're discussing about everything at once. Like it becomes really messy and difficult to comprehend what just happened. The last point is knowing the difference between healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict. Conflict management or conflict resolution needs to happen with respect. Respecting the partner, respecting the person with whom you're having the conflict. If you're having a disagreement or some raised emotions, you're crying, or you're showing frustration, you're setting some boundaries for space, you're expressing a need for space, those don't mean that a relationship is unhealthy or it is an unhealthy conflict. Those are actually a normal way of resolving conflicts. It doesn't necessarily mean that this conflict is unhealthy. But what I mean by an unhealthy conflict is when one person is going to use tactics of intimidation or humiliation, or they are going to make threats. They are going to make the person scared to actually express their emotions for the next time. There is manipulation, there is constant blaming, like nobody's listening at this point. It's the feelings are escalating. After the argument, there is a very long silent treatment. And this can also show that this relationship is, the dynamics are unhealthy. And the way that they are resolving the conflict is by shutting one person down. One person needs are not being heard or not being met. In this video, when I say conflict resolution, it's not meant to try to understand how you can resolve conflicts with somebody who is committed to hurting you or disrespecting you. In some situations, the healthiest response isn't trying to find the perfect words, but creating distance in order to protect yourself. And don't measure the health of a relationship by whether we fight or not, because every relationship at some point there will be some conflicts. It's normal, it's natural. So the thing to take from this video is you don't have to win every conflict. Sometimes the real goal is to protect each other and to protect your boundaries and find a way forward without losing yourself in the process. I hope that this video gave you the tools you need to better resolve conflicts in your own personal life. If there are some points that you would like to add, I would love to know about it. Drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you in my next one. Thank you so much for watching.